He signed it, $3 million for the resort. Then we dumped the smelly pirate in a nursing home. Hearing my nieces plot my ruin after a mild stroke should have broken me. Instead, I outsmarted them completely. I'm Thomas Miller, a 7-1-year-old retired merchant captain from Beaufort, North Carolina. Subscribe now and tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what would you do in my shoes? The first thing that returned to me was not my sight, nor the feeling in my right arm. It was the smell. It was the harsh, chemical sting of industrial bleach and floor wax. A sterile, lifeless odor that felt entirely foreign to a man who had spent 45 years breathing salt air, diesel fumes, and aged tobacco. I opened my eyes slowly. The world was a blur of fluorescent whitewash and gray shadows. A heart monitor clicked in a rhythmic, monotonous cadence near my left ear. Ticking, 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 like a pocket watch dropped to the bottom of a well. I was in room 214 of Beaufort Memorial Hospital, plugged into IV drips and draped in thin, stiff cotton blankets. I moved my fingers. My left hand responded instantly. Calloused and firm, my right hand was sluggish, heavy as lead, still numbed by the ischemic event that had knocked me down 36 hours ago. A stroke, a minor one. The doctor had said before the heavy sedatives dragged me under, but enough to leave a captain feeling anchored to the seabed. Then came the voices. They were hushed, filtered through the 3-inch gap of the heavy oak door leading out to the hallway. High-pitched, nervous, and laced with a suppressed, bubbly excitement that made my stomach turn. Did you double-check the signature line? That was Jessica, my elder niece, 34 years old, always smelling of expensive, synthetic perfume that made my eyes water, wearing clothes bought with credit cards she couldn't afford to pay off. Of course I did, Ashley whispered back, her voice sharper, more impassioned. He was so groggy on the morphine, he couldn't even read the letterhead. He signed right on the yellow sticky note, where I told him to. The notary public from the bank met me in the lobby 10 minutes ago. It's done, Jess. It's officially stamped. A muffled, breathless squeal echoed through the crack in the door. $3.5 million, Jessica whispered, her voice trembling with greed. The representative from Atlantic Horizon Eco Resorts said the wire transfer will clear into our joint escrow account by Friday once the county clerk files the deed. And what about the old man? Ashley asked. There was no warmth in her tone, no affection for the uncle who had welcomed them into his home. When their own father, my late brother, left them with nothing but unpaid debts, the doctor said he'll need round-the-clock physical therapy for his right side. Jessica replied casually, as if discussing an unwanted piece of broken patio furniture. I already spoke to the social worker. There's a state-funded assisted living facility inland, near Goldsboro. It's cheap. It takes his Medicare, and it's 2 hours away. Once the resort's excavators tear down that rotting old dock, we'll drop his suitcases off at the front desk and change our phone numbers. The smelly pirate can spend the rest of his days staring at a brick wall. They giggled a dry, the brittle sound that rattled down the quiet hospital corridor, and then their footfalls faded away toward the elevators. In the silence of room 214, I lay completely still. My heart rate on the monitor didn't spike. The line stayed steady. Tuck, tuck, tack. When you spend 4 decades at the helm of a 900-foot cargo vessel, carrying 40,000 tons of steel through Category 5 hurricanes in the North Atlantic, you learn a singular, immutable truth about survival. Panic is what kills you, not the towering waves, not the howling winds, not the pitch-black sky. Panic makes a man throw the wrong lever, read the radar wrong, and sink his own ship. When the storm hits, you do not scream, you do not weep. You lock your boots to the bridge floor, grab the wheel, and evaluate the hull. I closed my eyes and let my mind drift back 3 months, tracing the quiet, deceptive currents that had brought those 2 snakes into my paradise. Miller's Point had been in my family for over 80 years. Located just on the outskirts of Beaufort, North Carolina, it was a long, narrow strip of marshland, salt-sprayed pine trees, and a grand, gray-shingled house built by my father after the Second World War. Attached to the property was a sprawling wooden dock that stretched 200 feet out into the tidal waters of Taylor Creek. It wasn't a pristine, manicured estate. It was rustic, weathered, and wild. Spanish moss hung thick from the ancient live oaks, and the air always smelled of brackish water, sweet briar, and wet sand. After my wife, Sarah, passed away 6 years ago, that dock became my whole world. I spent my mornings sitting on a battered cedar bench at the end of the pier, smoking my pipe, watching the blue herons stalk through the shallows, and watching the shrimp boats haul in their nets at sunrise. It was a life built on solitude, dignity, and peace. Then came Jessica and Ashley. They showed up on my porch early in February, carrying designer luggage and tragic stories. They spoke of sudden job losses in Raleigh, terrible landlords, and how much they missed their dear Uncle Thomas. I knew better than to trust a calm sea under a falling barometer. I knew my late brother had raised them to value status over substance. But I was 71, lonely in a house built for a family, and foolish enough to mistake their sudden attentiveness for blood loyalty. For 3 months, they put on a masterclass in theatrical devotion. They cooked meals, though. Ashley always winced when she had to clean the kitchen. They swept the porch, though Jessica constantly sprayed lavender air freshener over my pipe smoke when she thought I wasn't looking. Uncle Thomas, Jessica would say during dinner, pouring me a glass of iced tea with a wide, bright smile that never quite reached her eyes. You work so hard maintaining this old property. Isn't it exhausting? All this marshland. It's so overgrown. Don't you ever just want to sell it? Take the cash and live somewhere effortless, like a nice, modern condo. A house is meant to be lived in. Jessica, I'd answer quietly, setting my glass down. And a piece of land isn't just soil. It's history. My father built this dock with his own hands. Every plank has a story. She would nod, smile that plastic smile, and pat my hand. Of course. Uncle, you're so traditional. It was the little details that eventually gave them away. It was the way Ashley's eyes lingered on the brass keyhole of the ancient floor, safe in my study. It was the moment I walked into the living room unannounced and found Jessica taking high-resolution photographs of my property tax statements and land survey maps with her smartphone. When I asked her what she was doing, she laughed airily and claimed she was helping me organize my paperwork for tax season. I said nothing. On a ship, when you spot a hairline crack in the bulkhead, you don't start shouting at the ocean. You silently mark the damage, check your lifeboats, and keep your eye on the water level. Then came the storm. Last Tuesday night, a heavy summer squall was hammering the North Carolina coast. Rain rattled against the hurricane shutters like handfuls of gravel. I was sitting at my heavy oak desk in the study, a glass of dark rye whiskey at my elbow, reviewing my monthly maritime logs. Without warning, the right side of my face went cold and numb. A sensation like thick black ink seemed to spill across the right hemisphere of my brain. My vision tunneled. The tumbler of whiskey slipped from my fingers, shattering against the heart pine floorboards. I tried to stand, but my right leg folded beneath me like wet cardboard, and I hit the rug with a heavy thud. I remember lying there on my side, gasping for air, watching the amber whiskey pool around the shards of glass. Jessica and Ashley rushed into the room. Uncle Thomas, Ashley gasped. I looked up at them, trying to speak, trying to tell them to reach into my pocket for my phone. But all that came out of my mouth was a slurred, unintelligible groan. I watched them. I watched their eyes. And that was the moment the last veil of my foolish hope was torn away. There was no terror in Jessica's eyes, no tears, no panicked desperation to save a dying relative. There was only a sudden, sharp, calculating spark. Jessica looked down at me, then looked at Ashley, and a slow, terrifying smile spread across her face. "Get his desk keys," Jessica whispered, her voice cold as iron. "Before the paramedics get here, check the top drawer." I lay there on the cold floor, trapped inside my own failing body, watching my own kin rifle through my private papers while I bled time. They didn't call 911 until they found what they were looking for. And hours later, in the dim light of the emergency room, while my mind was thick with sedative cloudiness and my body was paralyzed, they slid a heavy legal document under my hand. "Just sign here. Uncle Thomas." Ashley had cooed, pressing a pen into my unresponsive fingers guiding my hand across the paper like a puppet master moving a string. It's just an authorization for the county to clear the fallen branches from the dock after the storm. We're taking care of everything for you. Just sign. I signed. My hand shook, scribbling a broken version of my name at the bottom of a contract I couldn't read. Now, lying in room 214 of Beaufort Memorial Hospital, the full scope of their trap was clear to me. They had used my stroke, my weakness, my moment of absolute vulnerability to rob me of my home, my legacy, and my freedom. They had sold Miller's Point to a mega corporation for $3.5 million, and they were going to discard me in a cheap inland nursing home like a sack of garbage. Slowly, deliberately, I pulled my left hand out from beneath the hospital sheets. I reached up and peeled the heart monitor sensors off my chest. B. The machine began to emit a flat, continuous tone. Within 10 seconds, a young nurse bustled into the room, looking flustered. "Mr. Miller," she exclaimed, rushing to my bedside to reattach the wires. "What are you doing? You need to rest. Call the doctor." "Nurse," I said. My voice was rough, dry as sandpaper, and slightly slurred on the right side, but the tone was absolute. It was the voice that had commanded 50-man crews through gale force winds. "And tell him I am signing myself out against medical advice. At first light tomorrow morning." "Mr. Miller, you can't," she protested. "You had a stroke. You're in no condition." "I am in perfectly sound mind," I interrupted, staring straight into her eyes with a cold, piercing intensity that made her pause. "My mind is sharper than it has been in months. Get me my clothes, a pair of reading glasses, and a pen." She stared at me for a long moment, intimidated by the sheer, unyielding gravity of a man who refused to sink. "All right," she murmured softly. "I'll get the attending doctor." When she left the room, I turned my head toward the window. Outside, the night sky over Beaufort was dark and vast, illuminated only by the distant, rhythmic flash of the Cape Lookout lighthouse on the horizon. 2 flashes every 15 seconds, a beacon in the dark, warning sailors of the treacherous shoals beneath the surface. I let out a low, quiet breath, and for the first time in 3 days, the faint trace of a smile touched the left corner of my mouth. My nieces thought they had pulled off the ultimate heist. They thought they were dealing with an senile, helpless old sailor who could be tricked with a paper trail and a fake smile. They didn't know that 3 miles out from Miller's Point, deep beneath the dark, brackish waters of Taylor Creek, lay something they had never accounted for. They thought they had caught an old man in a net. They didn't realize they had just stepped onto a battleship. To understand how a trap is sprung, you must first understand the quiet sanctuary it was built to destroy. For 8 decades, Miller's Point had known only the natural rhythms of the North Carolina coast. My father, fresh home from the Navy in 1948, had cleared the pine brush with his own hands and driven the first cedar pilings into the muddy floor of Taylor Creek. The main house was built from dense cypress timber that had survived 50 hurricanes without so much as a creak in the rafters. It smelled of dried salt, old cedar, and the sweet, dark tobacco of my pipe, a blend of capped, black and dried cherry leaves that had settled into the grain of the wood over 40 years. After my Sarah passed away 6 summers ago, the silence of that house became my companion. Every morning at 5, I would walk to the end of the 200-foot dock, sit on the weathered wooden bench, and watch the mist rise off the tidal marshes. The blue herons knew me. The blue crabs scuttled beneath the dock timbers, undisturbed by the passage of time. It was a simple, solitary life, bound by the tides and the slow turning of the seasons. Then came February, and with it, the sound of luxury car tires crunching over my gravel driveway. Jessica's white BMW sedan looked utterly absurd parked beside my rusted 1998 Ford F-150. When she and Ashley stepped out into the damp coastal air, they looked like creature actors lost on the wrong movie set. Jessica was 34, clad in designer trench coats and oversized sunglasses, her heels clicking nervously against the crushed oyster shells of my walkway. Ashley, 3 years younger, walked 2 paces behind her, her thumb flying across her smartphone screen like a restless insect. "Uncle Thomas," Jessica had squealed, throwing her arms around my neck with a force that felt entirely staged. She smelled overpowering, a thick, cloying blast of synthetic vanilla perfume that immediately made my throat itch. "Oh, look at you. You look so rustic. We couldn't bear the thought of you out here all by yourself after the holidays. It's just terrible for a man your age to be so isolated." "I am never isolated, Jessica," I had replied softly, setting down my wood-chipping knife. "I have the creek, the birds, and my work." "Well, now you have us," Ashley chimed in, offering a thin, practiced smile that didn't alter the cold indifference in her eyes. "We're going to take care of you, Uncle. Family has to stick together." In the beginning, a foolish part of me, a soft, dusty corner of an old man's lonely heart, wanted to believe them. My late brother had been a gambler and a grifter, constantly chasing get-rich-quick schemes up and down the East Coast until his heart gave out in a Reno casino. I thought perhaps his daughters had inherited none of his rot. I thought perhaps they genuinely sought a connection to the only real roots their family had left. It took less than a week for the illusion to dissolve completely. They put on an elaborate show of domestic care, but the seams were glaringly obvious to anyone who knew how to look. Ashley would volunteer to cook dinner, but she handled my mother's vintage cast-iron skillets with absolute disgust, cringing whenever a drop of grease splattered her manicure. Jessica would sweep the front porch, but the moment she thought I was out of earshot down at the boathouse, I would catch her violently spraying lavender Febreze into the living room curtains, cursing under her breath about that repulsive pirate tobacco smell. They didn't love the point. They hated it. They hated the humidity that ruined their hair. They hated the evening mosquitoes that swarmed off the marsh grass. And they hated the mud that ruined their shoes. What they loved was what the point represented on a balance sheet. A seasoned ship captain does not wait for the waves to crash over the bow before he prepares his vessel. He reads the barometer. He watches the subtle shift in the wind direction. He notices the sudden drop in air pressure long before the sky turns gray. My barometer began to drop during the third week of March. We were sitting at the dining table. I was quietly eating my stew, while Ashley picked at her salad with the tip of her fork. "Uncle Thomas," Ashley began, her voice dripping with artificial curiosity. "I was reading an article in the Wilmington paper today. Waterfront property values along the Intracoastal Waterway have quadrupled in the last 2 years. Developers are paying insane money for marshland. Developers build boxes for people who want to look at nature without touching it," I said, chewing slowly. "They ruin the water, drive off the fish, and pave over the soul of the coast." Jessica leaned forward, resting her elbows on the lace tablecloth. "Yes, but Uncle, surely you've thought about what this land is worth. I mean, 8 acres of prime waterfront with a deep water dock. You could easily get $3 or $4 million. You could buy a penthouse in Charlotte. You could travel the world." "I've seen the world, Jessica," I answered, looking her squarely in the eye, 7 times over. "There is nothing in Charlotte that compares to watching the sunrise over Taylor Creek. This land isn't for sale. It will never be for sale." She stiffened slightly, a flash of irritation breaking through her sweet facade before she quickly recovered with an airy laugh. "Oh, of course. We're just dreaming out loud, Uncle. That's all." A few days later, the mask slipped even further. I was walking up from the dock around mid-afternoon, carrying a bucket of fresh clams. As I approached the porch, I noticed the heavy wooden door to my private study was pushed open a few inches. I stopped on the threshold, my wool-socked feet making no sound on the pine floorboards. Jessica was standing by my heavy oak desk. My steel filing cabinet was unlocked. A cabinet I always kept secured, though I had foolishly left the key brass ring hanging near the clock that morning. Her smartphone was out. Click, click, click. She was rapidly taking high-resolution photographs of my original 1,954 land survey maps, my county tax assessments, and the deed of ownership. Ashley stood near the window, acting as a lookout, her eyes darting nervously toward the driveway. "Hurry up," Jess Ashley whispered urgently. "If the old man catches us in here, he'll blow a fuse." "Hold your horses," Jessica snapped back under her breath. "I need to get a clear shot of the property boundary coordinates for the Atlantic Horizon legal team. They said if the waterfront frontage is over 600 feet, they can increase their initial offer by $500,000. My hands tightened around the handle of the metal bucket. A hot, sharp surge of anger flared in my chest. threatening to push its way through my throat. I wanted to march into that room, grab both of them by their collars, and throw them off my land onto the gravel driveway. But I forced my breathing to slow down. I forced my heart rate to drop. On a commercial vessel, when you realize a mutiny is brewing among the crew, you do not pull your sidearm and start shooting wildly in the dark. That only creates chaos. You keep your mouth shut. You observe who is holding the knives. You locate the ringleader, and you prepare a trap so absolute that none of them can escape it. I stepped back out onto the porch, allowed the screen door to slam shut loudly, and stomped my boots against the mat. "Jessica, Ashley," I called out, my voice raspy and ignorant. "Could one of you girls bring me a towel?" I dropped a clam in the entry hall. I heard a frantic scramble inside the study, the sharp metallic snap of a drawer sliding shut, and then Jessica emerged, smiling brightly, clutching a dish towel. "Coming, Uncle Thomas." "Oh, you poor thing. Let me help you with that." I looked at her, at the painted lips, the frantic pulse beating in her neck, the desperate greed dancing in her eyes. "Go ahead, little girls," I thought to myself, taking the towel with a frail, tremulous bow of my head. "Keep digging your grave. I'll make sure it's deep enough for both of you." The storm finally broke on the second Tuesday of June. It was an ugly, bruised squall that came roaring up from the Gulf Stream, tearing through the cedar trees and pelting the cypress siding with heavy, horizontal sheets of salt rain. The wind howled through the eaves of the old house like a dying animal, making the hurricane shutters rattle against their iron hinges. It was nearly midnight. I was sitting at my desk in the study, a single brass lamp illuminating my old logbook. A glass of straight rye whiskey sat untouched near my right elbow. I was writing down the barometric pressure when it happened. Without warning, a strange, terrifying coldness flooded the right side of my head. It felt as if a thick, viscous sheet of black ice was sliding down over my brain. My vision blurred instantly, the neat, handwritten lines of my logbook smearing into a useless smudge of dark ink. "What in the—" I tried to say, but my mouth refused to form the words. My tongue felt thick, heavy, and numb, like a lump of wet leather. I tried to reach for the armrest of my chair, but my right arm refused to obey. It hung limp at my side, completely devoid of feeling. The brass lamp flickered, my chest tightened, and a heavy, crushing weight pressed down on my lungs. I leaned forward, trying to balance myself, but my body tipped like an unbalanced hull. My elbow caught the edge of the glass. The heavy tumbler shattered against the heart pine floor, splashing amber whiskey across the rug. Then I hit the floor. The impact was heavy, deadened by the thick rug, but I couldn't feel my right shoulder hit the wood. I lay there on my left side, paralyzed, watching the whiskey soak into the floorboards 3 inches from my face. My breathing was ragged, shallow, and raspy. Footsteps pounded down the hallway. The door to the study burst open. Jessica and Ashley rushed into the room. "Uncle Thomas," Ashley gasped, stopping dead in her tracks at the edge of the rug. I looked up at them with my left eye. I tried to speak, tried to tell them to call the Beaufort EMS, tried to tell them to fetch my medicine from the bathroom drawer, but all that came out of my throat was a wet, pathetic gurgle. Jessica didn't drop to her knees. She didn't rush to my side. She stood there in the doorway, staring down at my crumpled form on the floor. Slowly, the terror on her face melted away. It was replaced by something far more sinister, a sharp, hungry, merciless glint of pure opportunity. She looked at Ashley. Ashley looked back at her. Is he dying?" Ashley whispered, her voice trembling, though not with grief. "No," Jessica murmured, stepping closer, her eyes scanning my limp right arm and the slurred, twisted muscles on the right side of my face. "It's a stroke. Look at him. He's totally incapacitated. Should I call 911? "Not yet," Jessica said coldly. She walked over to my desk, ignoring me completely as she stepped right over my legs. She pulled out the manila folder containing my master land title. At that exact moment, Jessica's smartphone, resting on the desk blotter, vibrated violently against the wood. The screen lit up in the dim room, casting a stark blue light across her face. I lay on the floor, my vision failing, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, staring at the glowing notification on her screen. It was a text message from a contact saved as Atlantic Horizon. Mark, drafting team finished the acquisition agreement. $3.05 purchase price locked in. All we need is his signature on the deed conveyance. Is the old man ready? Jessica picked up the phone, tapped out a 5-word reply, and smiled down at my helpless, paralyzed body. He's ready. Bring the paperwork. Hospital rooms at 3 in the morning have a way of stripping a man down to his barest essentials. There are no family portraits on the pale green vinyl walls, no ocean breezes rustling through the cypress blinds. There is only the harsh, fluorescent glow of the hallway lights filtering through the frosted glass transom, and the steady, cold drip of intravenous saline pushing through a tube taped to the back of my hand. I lay on the narrow, high mattress bed, my head propped on a flat, plastic-wrapped pillow that smelled faintly of industrial laundry detergent. The sedatives the ER physician had administered to calm my blood pressure were slowly wearing off, leaving behind a crystalline, cold clarity in my mind. Even as my body remained leaden and slow, the stroke had taken its toll on my right side. That much was undeniable. My right leg felt like a heavy piece of drift oak submerged in deep water, and my right hand twitched only when my mind pushed with immense, deliberate effort. But my brain was entirely mine. Decades of standing midnight watches on the bridge of container ships in zero-visibility fog had trained my mind to process every sound, every shift in vibration, every shadow that crossed my field of view. Around 4 in the morning, the heavy wooden door to room 214 clicked open. 2 figures slipped into the dim room. They walked on tiptoes, their rubber-soled shoes squeaking softly against the polished linoleum floor. I didn't open my eyes fully. I kept my eyelids heavy, cracked just enough to let a thin sliver of light in, taking long, slow, ragged breaths to simulate the deep, drugged sleep of a critically ill elderly man. Jessica approached the right side of my bed. She was dressed in the same silk blouse she had worn the night before. Though it was now rumpled and smelled of stale coffee and damp rain, Ashley stood near the foot of the bed, nervously clutching a thick leather folder against her chest as if it were a shield. Behind them, hovering in the doorway like a buzzard waiting over a fallen animal, was a tall, thin man in a tailored charcoal suit, holding a silver pen. "Is he asleep?" Ashley whispered, her voice tight with tension. Jessica leaned down close to my face. I could feel the heat of her breath on my cheek, laced with the sharp, acidic scent of peppermint gum masking cigarettes. She watched my chest rise and fall for 3 long seconds. "He's out cold," Jessica murmured under her breath. "The doctor said they gave him a heavy dose of Ativan, along with the blood thinners. He won't even remember what day of the week it is." She turned back to the man in the suit. "Bring the notary stamp. Mark, let's get this done before the morning shift change." Mark, the land acquisition representative from Atlantic Horizon Eco Resorts, stepped into the room with a swift, practiced silence. He didn't look at my face. He didn't check my wristband to see if I was conscious. To him, I was not a human being lying in a hospital bed. I was merely an inconvenient hurdle between a corporate board of directors and 8 acres of prime waterfront real estate. Mark unclipped a thick, heavy stack of legal documents from his folder and placed them onto the rolling plastic bedside tray. "Remember," Mark whispered, his voice smooth and entirely devoid of emotion. "The county registrar requires a wet signature in dark blue ink. Make sure his thumbprint doesn't smudge the secondary notary seal on page 12. I know how to handle my uncle." Jessica snapped softly. She reached out and grasped my limp right shoulder. "Uncle Thomas," she called out, her voice suddenly shifting into a sugary, high-pitched sing-song that made my blood run cold. "Uncle Thomas, wake up for just a second. Dear, it's Jessica." I allowed my head to roll slowly to the right. I opened my eyes wide, letting them wander unfocused across the ceiling tiles, allowing my jaw to slacken slightly. I let out a low, confused groan. Where's Sarah?" I mumbled, my voice thick, slurred, and deliberately clumsy. Is the tide coming in?" Ashley rolled her eyes silently at the foot of the bed, while Jessica's fake smile widened. "Sarah isn't here, Uncle Thomas," Jessica cooed, pressing a damp paper towel against my forehead with fake tenderness. "Sarah passed away years ago. Remember, you had a little fall at the house because of the storm. The wind damaged the old dock down by the creek. It's completely unsafe." "The dock," I rasped. blinking heavily. My father's. Doc. Yes. Sweetie. Jessica lied smoothly. Her eyes locked on mine with a terrifying, predatory intensity. The county building inspector called us this morning. They said the broken timbers are posing a hazard to the river traffic. They need you to sign a temporary authorization so the city crew can go in, clear out the fallen logs, and repair the pilings for you while you're resting here. She pulled the rolling tray closer to my chest. On top of the thick stack of papers lay a bright yellow sticky note. It was strategically placed over the top section of the page, completely covering the bold, black-lettered heading that read, Deed of Absolute Conveyance and Full Property Transfer. The yellow note had a small red arrow drawn on it in marker, pointing directly to a blank line at the bottom. Grantor signature. They thought they were so clever. They thought a yellow sticky note could hide the destruction of my father's legacy. Just sign right here on the line. Uncle Thomas. Jessica whispered, pressing a heavy, cold metal ballpoint pen into my numb right fingers. Just write your name so we can take care of everything for you. I lay there, feeling the cold steel of the pen, resting against my calloused skin. In that fleeting second, en ancien, instinctual part of me wanted to fight. It wanted to throw that tray across the room, spit in Jessica's face, and scream for the hospital security guards to arrest every single one of them for fraud and elder abuse. But a master captain does not engage in a fistfight on a sinking deck. If a crew has committed mutiny, if they have seized the helm and locked you out of the wheelhouse, you do not throw rocks at the armored glass. You step back into the shadows. You let them steer the ship exactly where they think they want to go, straight toward the uncharted reef you spent 30 years mapping out in the dark. I let my right hand tremble violently. I allowed my fingers to weaken, making the pen slip twice against the white paper. I can't hold it. Jess. I slurred, letting a tear of fake helplessness gather in the corner of my left eye. My hand. It won't move right. Yes, you can. Uncle. Jessica hissed, her sweet tone dropping for a split second into a harsh, frantic comment. She grabbed my trembling right wrist with her manicured hand, her fingernails digging hard into my skin, forcing my numb fingers around the pen shaft. She guided my hand down onto the paper. Together, her force pushing my deadened weight, we dragged the blue ink across the white line. Thomas, Miler. The signature was a ragged, illegible scrawl, the mark of a broken, senile old man surrendering his world. Got it, Ashley gasped, her voice trembling with excitement. Mark immediately pulled the paper back, inspected the scrawl with a pocket magnifying glass, and slammed a heavy rubber stamp onto the bottom right corner. Click-clack, notarized, Mark said quietly, a thin, satisfied grin touching his lips. The conveyance is legally binding. I'll file this with the Beaufort County clerk at 8:30 a.m. when the doors open. Thank God, Jessica breathed out, letting go of my wrist as if my skin were suddenly toxic. She didn't offer a towel to wipe the wet ink off my fingers. She didn't adjust my blanket. She didn't even look me in the eye. She turned her back on me immediately, her mind already miles away, swimming in visions of wire transfers, new sports cars, and luxury penthouses. Let's go, Jessica whispered to Ashley, grabbing her designer leather handbag from the bedside chair. I want to be at the bank. The second Mark's corporate escrow clears. They walked out of room 214 without looking back, leaving the heavy wooden door swinging slowly on its hydraulic hinges. I lay in the dim room, staring up at the white ceiling. The physical numbness in my right side remained, but inside my chest, the last lingering embers of warmth, family affection, and blood loyalty turned to cold, hard ash. The young girls I had welcomed into my home were dead to me. They were no longer my late brother's daughters. They were pirates who had boarded my ship in the night. I closed my eyes and listened. Outside in the quiet, carpeted hallway, their hushed, excited voices echoed faintly through the crack in the door. What about the demolition crew? Jessica asked Mark. Already scheduled. Mark replied smoothly. The resort's heavy engineering team is moving 2 heavy excavators and a pile driver down the access road first thing Monday morning, 6 a.m. sharp. They're going to tear that wooden dock apart, dredge the creek floor, and lay the concrete foundation for the new marina. Good, Ashley laughed softly. Burn the whole old dump to the ground. Their footsteps faded down the long hallway toward the elevators, leaving me alone with the steady, rhythmic clicking of my heart monitor. Tuck, tuck, tack. I opened my eyes, turned my head toward the night sky outside my window, and let out a long, silent breath. Monday morning at 6 a.m. They were bringing heavy machinery to tear down my dock. They thought they were going to pave over Miller's Point. They had no idea that 30 years ago, long before Atlantic Horizon Eco Resorts even existed, I had buried a naval mine beneath those very waters, and Monday morning was when they were going to step directly onto the pressure plate. By 8 o'clock Friday morning, against every frantic warning from the attending physician and the head nurse, I signed my own discharge papers with my steady left hand and walked out the front doors of Beaufort Memorial Hospital. I didn't take a taxi. I called my old friend, Captain Arthur Vance, a man I'd sailed with on the Atlantic lines for 20 years, to pick me up in his beat-up Chevy truck. Arthur didn't ask questions when he saw my slurred speech or the way I dragged my right boot through the gravel. He just opened the passenger door, spat his chewing tobacco into the dust, and drove me home to Miller's Point in absolute, respectful silence. When we pulled into my gravel driveway, the house looked utterly abandoned. Jessica's white BMW sedan was gone. Ashley's luggage was gone. The front porch was littered with empty coffee cups, crumpled fast food wrappers, and an overturned flower pot they hadn't bothered to pick up. They had already abandoned the ship, believing it was officially theirs to sell. I leaned heavily on my wooden walking stick, dragging my heavy right leg up the 3 pine steps onto the porch. Inside, the house felt cold, quiet, and hollow. The air smelled stale, polluted by the lingering, artificial scent of lavender, air freshener. They had sprayed to cover up my life. I didn't waste a single second. I walked down the dim hallway into my private study. The room was a disaster. Drawers had been left yanked open. My old sea charts were scattered across the floor, and my wooden lockbox had been pried open with a screwdriver. They had taken every paper that looked like a deed, a title, or a bank statement. They had taken everything they thought mattered. But amateurs only look at the surface of the water. They never know how to read the depth sounder. I walked over to the far corner of the room, behind a heavy, ceiling-high bookshelf filled with leather-bound naval history volumes. I placed my left hand against the side of the oak cabinet and shoved it with all the strength left in my upper body. The heavy shelf groaned, sliding 6 inches across the pine floorboards to reveal a small, square iron door built directly into the solid red brick chimney stack. It was an old Diebold floor safe, forged in 1912, fireproof and solid as a battleship's hull. My right hand was still weak, so I used my left hand to turn the heavy brass combination dial, left to 42, right to 18, left to 09, with a heavy, metallic clack. The heavy iron bolt retracted. I pulled the heavy door open. Inside lay no gold bars, no stacks of cash, and no land titles. Inside sat a single, thick manila envelope, bound with thick red twine and stamped with a faded red wax seal from 1996. I pulled the envelope out, carried it to my desk, and sat down in my cedar armchair. With steady fingers, I snapped the red twine and pulled out the crisp, heavy parchment inside. The bold black letterhead at the top of the document read, United States Environmental Protection Agency, APA, in cooperation with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, Federal Marine Sanctuary Preservation Decree. Region 4. I ran my thumb over the raised gold emblem at the bottom of the page. In the summer of 1996, 30 years ago, a massive commercial shipping liner had run aground off the coast of Beaufort, spilling thousands of gallons of toxic heavy fuel oil into Taylor Creek. While the corporate owners scrambled to cover their tracks, I took $20,000 of my own hard-earned captain's salary, hired an independent marine biology team from Duke University, and spent 6 months surveying the seabed directly beneath my 200-foot wooden dock. What we discovered was a miracle. Thriving directly beneath my dock pilings lay one of the last remaining primeval deep-water coral ecosystems in North Carolina. A rare, ultra-sensitive colony of Oculina arbuscula, ivory bush coral, alongside a massive bed of protected wild eelgrass that served as the primary breeding ground for endangered sea turtles and Atlantic sturgeon. Quietly, without telling a single soul in town, and certainly without telling my greedy brother or his children, I submitted the scientific findings to the federal government under the Federal Marine Protection, Research, and Sanctuaries Act of 1972. The EPA and NOAA officially designated the waters extending 300 yards outward from my dock shoreline as a Class 1 protected federal marine sanctuary. The decree was absolute, binding, and eternal. According to federal law, any unauthorized dredging, driving of concrete pilings, operating of heavy diesel machinery, or disturbance of the seabed within that designated grid was not a civil property dispute. It was a Class A federal felony, carrying mandatory prison sentences under Title 33 of the United States Code, along with crippling federal fines starting at $250,000 per day. I had paid the county property taxes every year for 30 years on the surface land, but the waters and the seabed belonged to the United States government and the marine life that lived beneath my feet. When Jessica and Ashley tricked me into signing that deed, they had successfully sold 8 acres of dirt to Atlantic Horizon Eco Resorts. But they had sold a house built directly over a federal landmine. At that moment, the front door clicked open. Loud, arrogant voices rang out down the hallway. Jessica and Ashley stepped into the study, carrying shiny shopping bags from high-end boutiques in Wilmington. Jessica was wearing a brand-new diamond watch, and Ashley was sipping a $100 iced coffee. They stopped dead in their tracks when they saw me sitting at my desk, dressed in my old flannel shirt, staring at them with my sharp, dark eyes. "Uncle Thomas," Ashley gasped, almost dropping her coffee cup. What are you doing here? The hospital said you couldn't leave. I am the captain of this house." "Ashley," I said softly, my voice calm, steady, and devoid of any weakness. "I go where I please." Jessica stepped forward, her eyes narrowing into cold, venomous slits. The fake sweetness was entirely gone now, replaced by the ugly, arrogant posture of a thief who thought she had already won. "It doesn't matter if you're here or not, old man," Jessica sneered, crossing her arms. The deed was officially registered with the county clerk at 9 a.m. today. Atlantic Horizon cleared the preliminary $3.5 million escrow transfer into our corporate account 2 hours ago. This house, this dock, and every square inch of this mud belongs to them now. You have 48 hours to pack your little trunk of pirate junk," Ashley added, tossing a colorful brochure onto my desk. "The car from the Green Grove Assisted Living Facility in Goldsboro will be here Sunday evening to pick you up. If you're not in it, we'll have the sheriff drag you off the property for trespassing." I looked at the brochure. I looked at the diamond watch on Jessica's wrist. Then I looked into their hollow, greedy eyes. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam my fist on the desk. I simply reached into my desk drawer, pulled out a fresh sheet of white stationery, a blue fountain pen, and a small, laminated pocket map of Taylor Creek, containing the exact GPS federal grid coordinates. "You girls have spent your whole lives looking for an easy payday," I said quietly, unscrewing the cap of my pen. "You think the world is made of paper contracts, luxury cars, and plastic smiles. You forgot that some things in this world are older, deeper, and far more powerful than your greed." Jessica let out a harsh, barking laugh. "Keep talking, old man." On Monday morning at 6 a.m., 3 heavy excavators are going to smash that wooden dock into toothpick splinters. Go ahead and write your little poetry. They turned on their heels and strutted out of the room, laughing hysterically as they walked down the hall to pack up their remaining clothes. Leaving me alone in the dim quiet of my study, I set the white paper before me. With my left hand steady, precise, and unwavering, I began to write a formal letter addressed directly to the regional director of the Environmental Protection Agency in Atlanta, Georgia, and the Special Investigations Division of the United States Coast Guard in Norfolk, Virginia. I detailed the exact GPS coordinates of the Oculina arbuscula coral sanctuary. I attached a copy of the 1996 Federal Preservation Decree. And finally, I informed them that an unauthorized corporate entity was bringing heavy diesel excavators and pile drivers to destroy a protected federal sanctuary on Monday morning at 6 a.m. I folded the letter, slid it into an official Federal Express priority envelope, sealed it with dark red wax, and set it on the corner of my desk. Outside my window, the tide was beginning to recede, exposing the dark, rich marsh mud and the ancient wooden pilings of my father's dock. Run along, little girls, I thought, watching the sun dip below the horizon, casting a long, blood-red glow across the water. Enjoy your diamond watches while you can, because Monday morning, the storm arrives. Monday morning broke over Beaufort in a cold, suffocating blanket of gray coastal fog. The air was heavy with humidity, holding the sharp, brackish tang of low tide. By 5:30 a.m., long before the sun managed to clear the tree line, the silence of Miller's Point was shattered by the deep, guttural roar of heavy diesel engines rattling down my gravel driveway. I sat on my front porch in my old cedar armchair. I was dressed in my dark Navy captain's wool coat, my silver-capped walking stick resting across my knees, a freshly packed wood pipe sending thin curls of cherry tobacco smoke drifting into the chilly morning mist. I looked entirely like an old man who had conceded defeat, quietly waiting to be evicted. 2 30-ton Caterpillar excavators, their yellow paint caked in dry clay, rumbled onto the marsh grass near the water's edge. Behind them roared a massive flatbed truck carrying an industrial pile driver, its heavy steel weight clanking violently against its metal frame with every bump in the road. A sleek black SUV pulled up right behind the construction convoy. Jessica and Ashley stepped out of the vehicle, dressed in sharp designer pantsuits and wearing hard hats they had clearly bought just for the photo opportunity. Behind them stepped Mark, the Atlantic Horizon representative, wearing a tailored Navy suit and holding a leather blueprint case under his arm. A local news crew from a Wilmington television station followed right behind them, cameras resting on their shoulders, ready to film the historic groundbreaking of the new eco-resort. "Look at him," Ashley giggled loudly, pointing her coffee cup toward the porch, sitting there like a senile statue. "I almost feel sorry for him." Jessica strutted toward the edge of the porch, her high heels sinking an inch into the damp soil. She looked up at me with a triumphant, razor-sharp sneer. "Last chance to load your suitcases into the truck, Uncle Thomas," she called out, her voice loud enough for the camera crew to hear. "The excavators start tearing down the old pier in 5 minutes. Once they drop the first hydraulic bucket into the water, there's no going back." I slowly lowered my pipe from my lips. I looked down at her, then glanced at Mark, who was frantically waving at the lead excavator driver to start his engine. "A wise sailor once told me, Jessica," I said, my voice low, gravelly, and completely devoid of panic, "that the most dangerous water isn't the ocean you can see. It's the reef hidden 2 inches beneath the surface." Jessica scoffed, rolling her eyes violently. "God, you are so pathetic. Driver, tear that wooden heap to ground." The lead excavator driver gave a double honk of his air horn. The heavy steel tracks groaned, churning the marsh grass into deep, black mud as the 30-ton machine edged toward the bank of Taylor Creek. The massive hydraulic arm lifted into the air, its sharp steel teeth positioning themselves directly over the first row of cedar dock pilings. Then, from out on the water, came the horn. It wasn't a commercial boat horn. It was a deep, chest-rattling, twin-tonal siren that echoed across the marshes like a clap of thunder. Bwaa. At. Everyone on the shore froze. Mark turned around, squinting into the dense morning fog rolling off the river. Emerging from the gray mist, moving at 20 knots with their bow waves slicing through the dark water, came 2 45-foot response boats from the United States Coast Guard, their bright red hulls and white racing stripes gleaming under the overcast sky. Mounted on the bow of the lead vessel was a heavy M240 machine gun, and 3 armed Coast Guard officers stood on the deck in full tactical gear, orange survival vests, and blue uniforms. "What in the hell is that?" Mark muttered, his face suddenly losing its color. Before anyone could answer, 3 black, unmarked Ford Explorers sped down my gravel driveway, their blue and red emergency lights flashing silently against the pine trees. They screech-halted, completely blocking the construction convoy from behind. 6 armed federal agents stepped out of the vehicles. They weren't local police officers. They wore dark blue windbreakers with bold, gold lettering emblazoned across the back. U.S. EPA. Criminal Investigation Division. Beside them stepped a tall, imposing man in a suit, holding an official red-sealed federal folder. A United States Marshal. All operators. Shut down those engines immediately. The lead EPA special agent bellowed through a bullhorn, his voice echoing across the site like an order from God. Power down all heavy machinery and step away from the controls. The excavator driver didn't hesitate. He slammed the kill switch, and the 30-ton diesel engine died with a coughing, sputtered gasp. Silence fell over Miller's Point, broken only by the rhythmic slap, slap, slap of the Coast Guard bow waves hitting the shore. Jessica stood frozen, her jaw dropping open. What is this? Mark, what is going on? Mark stepped forward, his corporate arrogance slipping back into place, though his voice trembled slightly as he pulled out his leather folder. Officers, there must be a mistake here. I am the legal representative of Atlantic Horizon Eco Resorts. We hold a clear, notarized county deed to this property. We have every right to build. Shut your mouth and step back. Sir, the U.S. Marshal interrupted coldly, stepping directly into Mark's space and flashing a gold badge. The lead EPA agent opened the red-sealed folder and held up a thick, multi-page document, stamped with the seal of the Federal District Court for the Eastern District of North Carolina. As of 6:00 Chief this morning, the agent announced loudly, his words cutting through the damp air like a razor. A federal emergency injunction and cease and desist order has been issued for the entire property known as Miller's Point, including all surrounding tidal waters. An injunction, Jessica shrieked, taking a step forward. On what grounds? We own this land. You own the dirt. Lady, the EPA agent said, turning his cold glare directly onto Jessica and Ashley. But the waters extending 300 yards outward from this shoreline are classified as a Class 1 protected federal marine sanctuary under Title 33 of the United States Code. You are currently operating heavy industrial machinery within 15 feet of a registered Oculina arbuscula coral habitat and endangered sea turtle breeding grid. A heavy, suffocating shock swept across the crowd. The news crew's cameraman immediately pivoted his lens away from the excavators, zooming in on Mark's pale, sweat-beaded face and the frantic expressions of my two nieces. A coral sanctuary, Mark whispered, his leather folder slipping from his hands and hitting the mud. He spun around to face Jessica, his eyes wide with absolute terrifying realization. You told us this was just a piece of unregulated marshland. You signed an indemnity clause, guaranteeing there were no federal environmental encumbrances on this deed. We didn't know, Ashley cried out, her voice cracking into a high-pitched panic. We didn't know anything about coral. Our uncle never told us. Ignorance of federal environmental law is not a defense. Mum, the EPA agent barked. Under Section 1319 of the Federal Clean Water Act, bringing heavy diesel equipment into a protected sanctuary with intent to dredge constitutes a Class A federal felony. The agent turned to the U.S. Marshals behind him. Seize all heavy equipment on site as federal evidence. Serve the corporate injunction on Mr. Mark here. Wait. Mark screamed, backing away frantically while holding his hands up. Atlantic Horizon is pulling out. We cancel the purchase. We demand our $3.5 million back immediately. You can't cancel, Jessica shrieked, grabbing Mark's arm with manicured nails. The money is already in our escrow account. We spent $200,000 on a retainer and luxury vehicles over the weekend. Then you had better sell those vehicles real fast. Lady, the U.S. Marshal said, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt, because Atlantic Horizon's legal team is filing emergency corporate fraud charges against both of you before noon today, and the United States government isn't finished with you yet either. I sat quietly on my porch, surrounded by the smell of my cherry tobacco smoke. I leaned back against the cedar wood, propped my left hand on my walking stick, and watched as the two girls who had called me a smelly old pirate broke down in hysterical, ugly tears right in the middle of the Black River mud. I raised my pipe toward Jessica, offering her a slow, cold, and utterly magnificent smile. I told you, Jessica, I murmured softly under my breath. As the red and blue lights reflected off the dark water of Taylor Creek, the reef is always waiting beneath the surface. The morning fog didn't burn off. It simply turned into a cold, persistent drizzle that made the black mud of Taylor Creek stick like wet cement to Jessica's $100 designer shoes. For 20 minutes, Miller's Point was transformed into a staging ground for a federal bust. Coast Guard officers threw heavy nylon lines over my wooden dock pilings, tying off their 45-foot response vessels with the calm, practiced efficiency of seasoned sailors. 2 armed EPA agents stood guard beside the massive yellow excavators, slapping white plastic sized by federal order banners across the hydraulic arms. The local news crew was having the day of their lives, their broad-spectrum camera light illuminating the tears running down Ashley's face, smearing her heavy eye makeup into dark, ugly streaks. Mark, the Atlantic Horizon representative, was on his phone 20 feet away, screaming at his corporate legal team over the roar of the rain. "I don't care about the press," Mark yelled, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "Freeze the escrow wire. Freeze it right now. The entire site is a federal sanctuary. The old man set a landmine, and those 2 idiots stepped right on it. If that money leaves the holding account, the board will have my head." Jessica stood near the passenger door of her BMW, her hands shaking so violently she couldn't input her passcode into her smartphone. She turned her head toward the porch, her eyes bloodshot, her face pale as a sheet. "Uncle Thomas," she shrieked, breaking away from the federal agent who was taking down her driver's license information. She scrambled through the black mud, her high heels snapping off at the ankles, stumbling up the 3 pine steps onto my porch. "Uncle Thomas, please, you have to tell them it's a mistake." She dropped to her knees right in front of my cedar armchair. The girl who had stepped over my paralyzed body 4 nights ago, the girl who had called me a smelly pirate and plotted to dump me in a cheap Goldsboro nursing home, was now clutching the knees of my wool trousers with her muddy, trembling hands. "Please, Uncle Thomas," she sobbed, her voice high, thin and pathetic. "Call the EPA man. Tell him you'll grant them a waiver. Tell them you'll undo the sanctuary. They're going to freeze our bank accounts. Mark says Atlantic Horizon is suing us for $3 million in fraud. We'll be ruined. We'll go to prison." Ashley stumbled up the steps right behind her, collapsing against the porch railing, her fake confidence entirely shattered. "Uncle Thomas, we're family." Ashley wept, her fingers digging into the cedar wood. "You can't let them do this to us. We're your brother's children. You loved our father. Please, just write a letter. Undo it." I sat motionless in my chair. I didn't pull my legs back. I didn't raise my voice. I simply stared down at them with eyes that had watched the freezing North Atlantic destroy hulls twice as strong as their flimsy characters. "On a ship, girls," I said softly, every word slow, deliberate, and icy cold. "When a crew member cuts the brake lines on the anchor winch during a storm, you do not offer them a cup of hot tea when the ship hits the rocks. You let the law of the sea take its course. We were just trying to secure our future." Jessica screamed, her voice cracking into a desperate, furious rage. "You're an old man. You're 71 years old. What do you need 8 acres of mud for? You're going to die here anyway. I am going to die here." "Jessica," I answered, leaning forward, placing my elbows on my knees, bringing my face 3 inches from hers. "In the house my father built, surrounded by the water I protected, with my dignity completely intact. But you traded your soul for a luxury car and a plastic watch, and you didn't even check to see if the check would clear." Before Jessica could reply, 2 heavy leather-gloved hands clapped down firmly onto her shoulders. 2 Beaufort County Sheriff's deputies, accompanied by a female EPA special agent, pulled Jessica to her feet. Another deputy stepped up behind Ashley, pulling her hands away from the porch railing and securing her wrists behind her back with thick white plastic zip ties. "Jessica Miller, Ashley Miller," the female agent read from a heavy blue card. "You are being placed under arrest pursuant to a federal warrant issued by the District Court for the Eastern District of North Carolina. The charges include felony attempt to defraud a federal environmental sanctuary, interstate real estate fraud, and elder financial exploitation under North Carolina General Statute 14 to 112. De elder exploitation. Ashley shrieked, writhing against the deputy's grip. We didn't exploit him. He signed the paper. He signed it in the hospital. And that signature, the EPA agent replied coldly, was obtained while the victim was under heavy medical sedation following an acute ischemic stroke, as certified by the attending chief of neurology at Beaufort Memorial Hospital 2 hours ago. Every text message you sent to Atlantic Horizon while he lay on the floor of his study has been recovered from the server under a federal subpoena. Jessica's knees gave out completely. The deputies had to haul her up by her armpits, her feet dragging through the gravel as they led her down the driveway toward the back of a blacked-out police transport van. Ashley was sobbing hysterically, calling out my name over and over again, her voice echoing uselessly against the cypress siding of the old house. Mark was already in the back of another squad car, his high-priced lawyer talking frantically into his ear through an earpiece, while 2 U.S. Marshals loaded Atlantic Horizon's leather blueprints and land contracts into evidence boxes. The lead EPA agent walked up the porch steps, taking off his wet hat. He looked at me, then looked out at the quiet, gray expanse of Taylor Creek, where the Coast Guard boats were idling peacefully in the low tide. Captain Miller, the agent said, offering me a sharp, respectful nod. I reviewed your 1,996 preservation file this morning before we dispatched the team. You did a hell of a thing 30 years ago. Sir, most men would have taken the buyout from the oil company back then. Land is a trust. A gent, I replied, bringing my wood pipe back to my lips and taking a slow, steady drag. You don't own it. You just hold the wheel until the next watch takes over. The agent smiled faintly, adjusted his coat, and walked down the steps to oversee the removal of the excavators. The red and blue lights flickered one last time against the wet trunk of the ancient live oak tree as the convoy of federal vehicles, squad cars, and police vans slowly pulled out of my driveway, their tires crunching over the gravel until the sound faded into the quiet patter of the rain. I sat alone on my porch. The air was fresh, filled once again with the sharp, clean scent of salt, vetsund, and my cherry tobacco. The artificial smell of synthetic vanilla, completely washed away by the storm. The silence that followed the departure of the federal convoy was not empty. It was the deep, heavy, cleansing quiet that settles over a coast after a 3-day hurricane finally breaks. The rain slowed to a gentle mist, then stopped altogether. Through a tear in the heavy gray cloud cover, a single shaft of late-afternoon sunlight broke through, striking the dark, brackish waters of Taylor Creek and turning the ripples into liquid copper. I stood up from my cedar armchair, resting my weight on my silver-capped walking stick. My right leg was still stiff, the stroke leaving behind a lingering drag in my heel, but the feeling in my right hand was slowly returning. I flexed my fingers into a firm fist, feeling the strength returning to my forearm. Down by the gravel driveway, my old friend Captain Vance was standing beside his Chevy truck, chatting quietly with 2 local fishermen from the Beaufort docks. They had watched the entire federal bust unfold from across the water. As I walked down the porch steps, Arthur looked up, spat his tobacco into the damp grass, and gave me a slow, respectful tip of his oiled canvas cap. No words were needed between old sailors. They knew what had happened. In a small coastal town, news travels faster than the incoming tide. By nightfall, every boat captain, shrimp fisherman, and dock worker from Beaufort to Morehead City would know that 2 greedy girls had tried to rob an old merchant captain and had ended up in federal cuffs instead. In the months that followed, the legal machinery of the United States government turned with slow, inexorable precision. The federal district court in Raleigh officially declared the fraudulent property conveyance completely null and void. The deed was returned to my name, sealed with an ironclad federal covenant that permanently barred any future commercial development, dredging, or industrial construction on Miller's Point. Atlantic Horizon Eco Resorts faced crippling corporate fines from the EPA, along with a massive public relations nightmare that sent their stock prices tumbling. To avoid further federal prosecution, the corporation settled out of court, paying over $600,000 into a state environmental restoration fund dedicated to monitoring the Oculina arbuscula coral sanctuary beneath my dock. As for Jessica and Ashley, the law showed them no more mercy than a granite reef shows a wooden hull, faced with overwhelming paper trails, bank subpoenas, and recorded text messages detailing their intent to defraud an incapacitated elderly relative. Their high-priced defense attorneys advised them to plead guilty. They were sentenced to federal prison time for grand larceny, elder financial exploitation, and conspiracy to violate the Federal Clean Water Act. The luxury sports cars were repossessed, their boutique credit cards were canceled, and the $5 million they had dreamed of spending vanished like sea foam in a gale. One sunny afternoon in early October, 3 months after the storm had cleared, a small government van pulled up to my driveway. 2 technicians from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration stepped out, carrying a heavy, polished bronze plaque mounted on a thick slab of native cypress wood. With my permission, they bolted it securely to the lead, piling at the very head of my 200-foot wooden dock. I walked out to the end of the pier, my walking stick clicking rhythmically against the cedar planks. The sun was warm against my face, and a gentle southwesterly breeze carried the sweet, crisp smell of autumn salt air. I leaned over the wooden railing and read the raised bronze lettering on the plaque. Captain Thomas, Miller Marine Sanctuary, established 1996, protected in perpetuity, dedicated to the preservation of North Carolina's deepwater coastal ecosystems and the eternal dignity of those who guard them. I ran my calloused left thumb over the cool bronze letters. A blue heron landed softly on a barnacle-encrusted piling 30 feet away, folding its long gray wings and watching the water with bright, yellow eyes. Beneath the clear, tea-colored surface of Taylor Creek, I could see the dark, waving fronds of eelgrass and the ancient, ivory-colored coral heads resting securely in the mud, untouched by heavy excavators, undisturbed by human greed. I sat down on my weathered wooden bench, pulled my wooden pipe from my coat pocket, and packed it with fresh cherry tobacco. I struck a match against the heel of my boot, cupping my hand against the sea breeze as the sweet, aromatic smoke curled up into the clear blue sky. I felt no bitter triumph. I felt no burning joy of revenge. True strength does not rejoice in the destruction of others. It simply finds peace in standing firm against the tide. I had protected my father's house. I had saved the sanctuary I had mapped out 30 years ago, and I had proven to myself that an old sailor, no matter how bruised by the storms of life, never surrenders his helm. I set my pipe on the bench beside me, looked directly into the camera lens, and smiled a warm, quiet, and deeply knowing smile. If you've stayed with me all the way to the end of this journey, my friends, I want to leave you with one simple truth I learned over 45 years at sea. In this life, the most dangerous storms don't blow in from the open ocean. They don't arrive with howling winds or towering dark waves. The most dangerous storms come from the dark, quiet corners of human greed, often from the very people you welcomed into your home and trusted with your heart. When those storms come, and they will come, for all of us, do not panic. Do not shout into the wind, and do not let anger consume your soul. The true wisdom of age is not about fighting every wave that hits your bow. It's about knowing where your anchors are dropped, keeping your mind cold and clear, and quietly building a reef that no greed on earth can ever dismantle. If Thomas Miller's story brought a little warmth to your heart today, or reminded you of the quiet power of standing your ground, please take a second to hit that like button. Share this video with a friend who might need to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice, wisdom, and life on the high seas. And before you go, drop a line in the comments below. Tell me, what part of Captain Miller's journey resonated with you the most today? I read every single one of your thoughts from right here on the porch at Miller's Point. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourselves, and keep your course steady until we meet again.